three parts: national, regional, and also then some local information. So at the national level, just some updates there around the Bluetooth tracing enhancement. So that's to do with, I guess phone-to-phone contact tracing. I think probably the recent Northland community case saw the benefit of that, of being able to track accurately. So that's simply a matter of, most people have that COVID app on their phone. It's enabling the phone-to-phone Bluetooth capability, sort of a couple of clicks into your phone, if you haven't done that already. The 2020 National Emergency, the NEMA survey, so there were some key points in that. Some of them probably not so surprising, in that I guess 88%, one of the statistics there, 88% of people take one action or prepared for an emergency, which was certainly helpful. While it was quite low, that 24% felt that they were fully prepared at home. And not surprising, I guess New Zealanders who do not own their home or flatting, and those with lower household income were the least likely to have done at least, to have completed at least one action. Sort of some statistics at the end of, I guess, the survey are helpful for us in terms of seeing what people understand that emergency involves. Most New Zealanders still think disaster is simply just an earthquake, and don't sort of take into account other emergencies, the pandemic being one of them. But it was interesting that 85% of the population knew where to evacuate to higher ground or some other location should an earthquake occur. And a third of New Zealanders say they would utilise civil defence information during or immediately after disaster. So that helps us sort of prepare around our comms and our strategies around public messaging. At a regional level, again, COVID-19 resurgence planning, certainly over the last quarter, right up through to December. So that was, I guess, identifying how we would manage, again, a resurgence of COVID. And I think the third paragraph down there says the recommended protocol would be a hub and spoke model. And that would be managed through the GEMO, the Group Emergency Management Office, with incident control points at local authority locations. So centrally located, but we would still, within each of our councils, be required to manage locally. So that would be the initial planning for initial resurgence. Obviously, if it escalated and it went to level 3 or to level 4 especially, it's likely to actually move to each of the councils individually managing that emergency. And I guess it's a page on, but it's also to do with COVID resurgence, so I'll touch on that now. And then also local controllers, myself and Wayne, and welfare managers also participated in a series of workshops during October, November, and then a large-scale desktop exercise at a regional level with health, MSD, other government departments on the 16th of December, which was certainly quite helpful. Drought relief funding. So we've had a few inquiries around that, and a check with the National Office shows that there is some funding still available out of the 10 million that was allocated last year for drought relief funding. So we're able to answer a few local questions around that and the process that people go to try and apply for that funding should they need to do so. Moving on, obviously our shared service agreement, we touched on that at the last meeting, but we've finalised our activation triggers and levels as to when we would work individually or at what level it would be that we combined our shared service and responded with a combined joint EOC. So that protocol has been formalised and forms part of the shared service agreement. In November, we attended a crowded spaces forum held at Mystery Creek. So that again was working with other departments as to how we would manage a range of emergencies, COVID, but also I guess how we would support each other in acts of terrorism or disorder or other large-scale events, Mystery Creek being one of those where an emergency occurred, and how emergency services and civil defence would manage that. Moving on through, I guess, our community engagement. So good to see the community response plans have been completed for Ohaupo, Pirongia and Wharepapa South. And Te Pāhu is, I guess, nearing completion as well. So pleased with that. Also attended Pirongia Community Association meeting in November, Aotearoa Primary School over a week, assisted them, and then also the Waipa Welfare Committee's meetings in November, December with other government agencies. Training, again, I guess back in a regular training regime now with our foundation training, with good numbers attending across our 3 councils. So there were 17 and attended the most recent training in November. Also welfare, I guess, welfare centre evacuation training. We hosted a regional course in Aotearoa where a number of Waipa staff also attended that. Adverse in terms of response, two weather events. I guess weather reports were reasonably accurate. Probably the second was on the 6th to the 8th of November and also the 25th of November. Probably what we didn't realise was the weather event on the 25th of November, so much rain would fall in the CBD of Te Awamutu. So there was flooding, surface flooding in some commercial premises, and I think a section of the ground floor of the council building here flooded. And that required a response from Fire and Emergency New Zealand, and appliances from Hamilton, Te Rapa, Cambridge also assisted the local brigade. So aside from surface damage and cleanup to those premises, no long-lasting effects as a result of that weather event. And coincidentally, on that same day as that weather event, reasonable tornado occurred in the Pokaru area, causing damage to a house roof, adjoining shed, barbecues and some farm equipment. So it's a second or third actually tornado we've had through that area over the last 12 months, which we've reported through the regional council. And other than that, closing off with recovery, so a substantive report on recovery was presented to strategic planning policy on the 1st of December last year. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dave. Very busy quarter for you. I have a quick question for you. That disaster preparedness survey, is there any suggestion that there might be regional variation in terms of people's preparedness? Because I guess in my Pollyanna kind of world, I'd like to think that rural areas would be a bit more sort of self-sufficient, but more prepared for an emergency should one occur.
Yeah, I think that'd be fair, because that's what we find with the community response plans, is actually we go to those smaller communities. It's just too difficult to do them for Te Awamutu or Cambridge, but those small communities are resilient. A lot of them have already those plans in place, and who would do what, who's got what sort of equipment or machinery. They understand they may be isolated or cut off for a number of days, so they're prepared for that. I think I certainly sort of took that out of the survey as well, as well, how do we actually grab some of that information for us to be helpful? And when I was looking at it, I think there's actually probably some questions that we could put within our own council surveys, within our own, I guess, our Waipa base as well, and something that we could talk about sort of with the comms team or people within council as to how we do that to try and get in alignment with that information.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea, because of course you want to use that information to help you target your messages to people that could benefit from being sort of educated a little bit more about that sort of level of preparedness required. So thank you for that. Yeah,
and I think just to close off on that, one of the things, I guess, as our community is more diverse, is that message being that we're pushing out being understood by all of those communities, and that was something that came out of the survey as well. Look through it.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Lou?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dave. It's an excellent report, and as sitting on the joint committee, I just wondered whether you wanted to develop the fact that we're now evaluating our local events and our local councils on a national scale, so we get a scale of the preparedness of all of our infrastructures throughout the Waipa, or throughout the whole of the area, so that we have a measuring program that is more accurate.
Yeah, so there's been some significant work go on with regards to that. So, and we've had, I guess we've been on working parties for that as well. So it's in its final stages, basically where we were to exercise and test our processes and systems. How do we score, how do we mark that to make sure, I guess, that we're up to speed and that actually we're developing year on year and improving. And so it's, I guess, at a regional and national level, it's making sure there's consistency with, first of all, how we exercise. It's the same, we're testing ourselves in the same way, and then what's the marking regime for it across a number of different categories. There's quite a lot of work gone into that. I think it's finally going back to Kahiki Joint Committee. And this would be not for, I guess, this fiscal year would be in place for the next financial year, but we would test it. We're due for a large-scale exercise before June 30 ourselves, but we're hoping to be able to test it ourselves, you know, scoring under the marking regime this year. Yeah.
Great, thanks for that. Any further questions? Jim, did you have one?
Quick one through you, Madam Chair. And I know that that weather event that we had here on the 25th of November, we didn't really have time to declare an emergency. It was here and gone so quickly. But the question I have is, in terms of the damage that was done, and I know a lot of it was blocked gutters and water leaking into buildings, but have we had a look at our network, I suppose, our stormwater network? Are there problems that we need to be addressing in our long-term planning, or are we accepting that our infrastructure is up to standard and we've just got to live with these problems? Because unlikely to get an event like that again, but we don't need to get one that bad, and we could still have flooding. So has the information from a civil defence perspective gone to our services group to make sure that there's not partial blockages in some of our stormwater drains or something that made the situation worse than it should have been?
We have, I guess, tested that through, I guess, tabletopping around our discussions, saying, well, it's part of, I guess, reduction or building that resilience is how clear are our waterways, our drainage, is it up to taking that? So that's probably something I'd have to take away and go and sit down and say. Certainly, though, obviously on the day we liaised with them, and they were aware of the amount of rain that occurred within there. It was just the infrastructure couldn't cope with it on that particular day. But again, it's probably useful for us to know is actually what are those levels or what are those tipping points where we're going to, you know, have even more flooding, or was that the absolute limit, I guess is what you're asking, or how much more could we have taken without even getting worse? Yeah.
I suppose my concerns are that, you know, we had businesses with water rushing through their premises, and they've had not as severe events, but they had similar situations. And I suppose it's a case of what does a private individual have to do to try and rectify that, as opposed to what are we doing from a council perspective looking at our infrastructure? Do they need pumps? Do they need some form of warning systems? Even in our new building down here from the Ministry of Social Development, cars in the basement flooded. You know, so yeah, you know what caused that, and do they need big pumps, or is it something wrong with our infrastructure?
Okay, I'll take that and I'll check with the waters team.
Thanks, David. Does anybody else have any questions for Dave? No? That being the case, we have the recommendation there to receive your report. Lou and Roger. All those in favour say aye. Carried. Against, carried. Oh, excuse me. Thanks, Dave. And another busy man, Wayne, quarterly district growth report. Welcome. And Kirsty.
Good morning, everybody, Your Worship and Madam Chair and councillors. I'm very pleased to come along today and with Kirsty to present the quarterly district growth report. It's really encouraging that we've got sustained growth and development in our district, and that's really positive. It is putting pressure on our resources. I could talk about a little bit about that as we go through the report. And yeah, but very pleasing. So perhaps in the first section, if you can, Kirsty will just go through the the national, regional, local areas, parts of the report in relation to the sub-regional strategic planning initiatives and matters that are happening at, as I say, the national and regional levels. And then I'll talk a little bit more about the local area and various statistics associated with that. So, Kirsty.
Kia ora koutou, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm going to assume that you've read the report, but would just like to highlight a couple of things, please. In regard to national legislation, we have the Water Services Bill that you may have seen covered off in the media. Council's response to that will be led by the Three Waters team supported by strategy. So we're just working with the team to develop a project plan for that. But my understanding is that the intention is to workshop with elected members to enable you to have input into that process before that submission is due to be made to central government on the 2nd of March. So a really tight time frame, but we are incorporating time for elected members to input. With regard to the sub-regional strategic planning initiatives, David Topman is on leave, so bear with me. Any specific questions that you may have, I may need to take back to him. Just with regard to future-proof, we have made you aware previously of the restructuring that has been led by Peter Winder in assuming his role. And in the report, there is a list of working groups that have been developed. So Council's executive team has approved a number of staff from across the organisation, particular impacted areas, to input and provide technical expertise into those working groups, particularly in relation to policy planning, Three Waters and transportation. With regard to all of these work streams under the sub-regional area, we will be reporting back to you through this report quarterly and in the intervening periods, whether that be formally or informally through workshops and or Friday mail out, but we will be keeping you informed as to the progress of these work streams. Just moving on to the district level strategic planning. Hannah, sure.
I just asked a question about the future-proof. Yeah. Firstly, I'm really interested in the biodiversity credit market and offsets thing. And is there any information about that already, or is there going to be more stuff provided for us?
I will follow up on that, Claire, and make sure that we come back to you. Yeah, I'll make a note.
Yeah. And I'm pretty happy with the work streams or the working groups, but there's nothing there about sustainability or climate change. I presume that's because perhaps the regional council is going to be handling that rather than future-proof.
So certainly the regional council will have a lead role. My understanding is that that will be incorporated within, for example, policy working group, possibly other areas. So yeah, I'll also make a note of that just to get more detail about where that might be incorporated and come back to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Just with regard to district level, ngā hana Pōuri, so we're really happy that we've finally made some progress on this. This has been one of our more challenging projects. You'll recall that we came to you and got approval to go out and engage with the community. And we've then been working with a key landowner, their advisors, the New Zealand Transport Agency and Ministry of Education in regard to the development of a 6 option. In the new year, we undertook a multi-criteria analysis assessment with internal staff and consultants. We are going to be coming back to this committee in March with the detail around that 6th option. We've received the revised village concept plan today, and we will be looking to go out to the community in March. So yeah, that's really exciting that we have made significant progress and that we've got agreement with the various stakeholders around the table.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge the work that staff have been putting in to get that over the line. Thank you very much.
Thank you. With regard to Kahiki Urban Development Plan, this is another one that's been a long-standing project where we had engagement with the community last year, some time ago now. We've actually been working with Mana Whenua, acknowledged that they needed to have greater input into this piece of work than they had. So in terms of timeframe, we haven't been able to firm that up, and that is in part that we're waiting to hear back from Mana Whenua. There has been some limited engagement, but we are also taking guidance from them as to what future engagement looks like. And just with regard to the Cambridge growth cells, that's something probably that's best spoken to by Wayne and or Tony. So that's all that I have if there are no further questions.
So just picking up on that point about the Cambridge growth cells, so the C2, C3 in particular. So I sent out a note on the Friday mail out to the councillors last Friday, I think. So I was just picking up on the work associated with the C2. So as you'll be aware now, we have confirmed the notice of requirement for the primary school in the C2. That's been an amazing fast track process. I've never seen a school to go through a process so quickly without any contention. So the conditions were agreed. The recommendation to the school was put. The school has confirmed the notice of requirement, so it's in the plan now. So that's settled, the primary school in the C2. Other good news is that we did have a high-level meeting with the 3M's directors, and that's produced another, I guess, back to the high-level governance meetings that's going to be taking place between senior staff and the relevant 3M's directors, with technical meetings to occur as required. So hopefully, as the issues arise, we can deal with it at a governance level. There will need to be parallel processes, I would assume, with those other affected landowners as a result of the 3M's application, with the infrastructure going on other persons' property. So we'll need to be working closely with the affected persons. So at this stage, our consultant planner is working with the 3M's on the application that's been lodged and the information, and making sure it's sufficient for a further process, which is likely to be a limited notified process for those affected landowners, but no decision on that yet been made. So that's good, and hopefully we can progress the development in the C2 area together with the joint venture arrangements with 3M's and the St Peters on the C3, and get a development agreement associated with this BIL land in the C10, because I understand they want to progress the roundabout getting into the APL development. Just moving on to section 6. So the E-plan, so I understand the tender has now been awarded on the E-plan. ISOPIST has got the job on that. So the program remains on track, and Tony and the team are handling that. The national directions and RMA reform. So again, standards on track. We are removing the minimum car parking requirements from the district plan, and we'll be doing a notice in the paper in February. There's no need for further consultation processes required associated with that. Tony's watching very closely the changes to the RMA that are coming forward. So any information that comes out of government, we'll be letting you know in terms of changes in that space. The plan change work is there in table 1 in the report. So it's a very busy work streams in there. We have secured our senior policy planner to help our policy planner out to ensure that we maintain our pathway for delivery of the timeframes associated with that. As some of you are aware, hearings are scheduled for some of the submissions associated with those plan changes.
Did you manage to look at that conflict between the Zone 2 meeting and the
Yes.
plan change hearing that we've got?
Yes, I picked that up over the weekend.
Go-
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I'm aware there's a conflict with the Zone 2 meeting and a plan change hearing meeting. I haven't had a chance to follow that through. It's on my to-do list today, so we'll get back to you in regard to that. So there's some information there from our infrastructural development team, just update on work that's been undertaken by their team, particularly in relation to the growth cell. So I'll just take that as read. The resource consents, so the volumes have been quite high in terms of resource consents during this quarter, significantly, particularly during significant numbers of applications have come in and been lodged by applicants prior to Christmas. So we're having to work through that backlog. We've had an increase of 18 resource consents compared to the same period last year. And to reduce the reliance on consultants, because we're having to use consultants for the peak workloads, we are securing another senior planner to help in that process. We have had an appeal in relation to the SAN inquiry. I sent some information out to councillors on the Friday mail out. So we've got we've retained Phil Lang in regard to representing the council. We've already got a meeting lined up with the applicant who's lodged an appeal over a particular condition. We're hoping we can clear that condition issue away reasonably quickly. And then we're left with a substantive part of the appeal from the submitter, which is the neighbour across the road in relation to the location of the canter track to the entrance of the quarry. And that might be particularly a healthy discussion between the applicant and the submitter on that matter. But we'll wait and see if there's any resolution without having the need to go to formal mediation hearings processes. LIM volumes more than the same period in 2019, so some information in regard to that in the report. Building consents, that shows an increase compared to previous years, with the total number of building consents increasing significantly from 2019. So when we do a calendar year comparison, we've had 267 more building consents than the 2019 calendar year, so 2020 was more. And then compared to the same period last year, so just the quarter period, we've had 49 more building consents. That's shown in figure 4. And figure 3 has information relating to numbers of new dwellings. So demonstrating again, Waipa is a growth council, and construction activities are reasonably resilient and sustained.
Roger.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I suppose really a comment, but those figures look really, really positive, don't they, in terms of our recovery. And it'll be really interesting to see when we get the financials through, as you know, we had big concerns about our non-rates revenue, and has that really been mitigated, and then we're going to see a far better result, because not only are we seeing that growth happening, but of course the report that we just had on the Waipa pools increase, and we know that the library's been increasing, and it just seems to be that we're in a really positive position in Waipa. It'll be interesting to get a report from our community team that's actually gone out there to try and look at what recovery means. And yeah, so
yes.
I think it's a good positive sign.
No, that's a good observation, and I should get the financials through. The end of the month just ticked over, so we'll get the information through end of January, next few days. So we'll have an idea about the level of fees and charges that are coming in as a result of processing those applications. So just I'm just conscious of time. Monitoring and enforcement. So there's information in there relating to monitoring and enforcement. 107 complaints on the resource consents breaches and district plan rules, things in amenities, setbacks, home occupations, and we've had 133 complaints relating to bylaw breaches. 28 littering complaints, 92 parking complaints relating to obstruction, grass burns, HTT parking. We have now got another enforcement officer on the team, and so we are able to progress, for example, the work that we talked about with the rubbish dumping areas, and we've got Pirangia lined up as the first cab off the rank. You'll get some information at the end of this week, as I understand, from Carl and the team about the letters that are going out to people in regard to starting to enforce those rubbish points. So having an additional person on in conjunction with working at the Waitomo Council is just bolstering our ability to do that sort of work and respond more to parking complaints. Animal control, so the August period we've had the animal dog registration renewal processes completed, so we've had a slight increase in number of registered dogs now, 8,905, had 2.5%. Unregistered dogs, I guess that's still the point, Carl, we're still 2.5. Yeah, 2.5, following through on some of those unregistered dogs to be followed up. Had dogs impounded, so we had 44 in that quarter, large number of claimed. We had dogs stolen from Kahiki Pound and recovered by police, and they've been issued $750 fine for doing that, and there's CCTV going in on those pounds. It's a health and safety issue, and Carl's working with our IT team. In fact, hopefully progress today in regard to that matter. Environmental health has also been busy, 572 inquiries for food and noise, contaminated land, licensing, public health matters. There's 4 new food businesses premises issued with food registrations. There are 62 food premises audited, so it's good to know that the team's auditing those premises, making sure they're doing what they ought to be doing. And there's been non-compliances that have been identified. So we'll be working through with those food premises to make sure they comply with all our requirements. Liquor licenses, there's 2 new on licenses, Pirangia Pines Function Centre, Cuba, Cambridge. The DLC work, there's been a couple of applications. One of them actually was withdrawn of the bottle storage application at 451 Alexander Street. There's a number of submissions in opposition to that. Excessive noise, 214 complaints, increased 46 since the same period last year. And then that's probably it, Madam Chair. The appendix is detailed there with the Waipa District Growth Cells, a bit of an update there. The current major applications, together with information I've sent out from the Friday Mail, that you've sort of been apprised of that. Numbers of building consents in Appendix 3, DLC applications, Appendix 4, quarterly statistics, Appendix 5, and year-to-year comparisons in Appendix 6. So I'll leave it there. Any questions?
Fantastic. Thank you for your report. Claire, question.
Thanks, Wayne. Great report. I've got a question about excessive noise complaints from Pirangia. I was advised that there might be a lot of them around the pub having music playing. I just wondered, I know Carl's in the room, whether or not he's noticed that there's a pattern there or something.
I don't have the detail. Carl might comment.
No, through the chair, certainly historically, yes. I'm not aware of it. This quarter's report. I've seen in the past where they've come up with a neighbourhood. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you for that. Well, we have the Hazel.
How's the dog pound, the new dog pound progressing, Wayne? Or was it? I realise it's going to take a while, but it's good to be able to tell the Kahiki people what's happening.
Right. Well, I'm not sure if it's a good news story for Kahiki people, but in terms of the dog pound, we're not going to lose the Kahiki dog pound. We're looking to sell the surplus land around the Kahiki dog pound to help facilitate building a new pound, which is going to be located in the Cambridge pound area. So the budget's in the LTP for doing some work the next financial year for the designation and design work of that new pound facility, and then the construction of the pound is the subsequent financial year, so 22-23. There will be a less level of activity at the Kahiki dog pound, but there won't be any increased level of activity. So, but we still need a place over the side of the district for people picking up dogs or doing any microchipping, those sorts of things. So that's the plan. It's in the LTP for the construction of the new pound.
Thanks, Wayne. Graham.
I knew I'd catch up with you today at some stage. Just an issue I want some clarification on. Massive finals rowing day yesterday at Karapiro, and I, with a group of cyclists, encountered cars that were parked on the cycleway, not blocking totally, but I don't think they should have been parked there. What I'd like to know, is that an enforcement from the council or is it a police matter? And it may be that we need to look at actually putting up some serious amount of signs to stop what happened yesterday. Liz is aware. I've been talking to Liz, but she might have an input into that. But it wasn't good.
Was this on the reserve that you're doing? Yeah.
In the first instance, but similarly on the footpath leading down through the crow's nest, people were half on the grass and then the other half of the cars parked on the cycleway. In one couple of cases, the back bumpers were hanging out across the cycleway, and if you've got a group of cyclists, I just think it's just a hazard that we don't need. Right. The other thing was it was creating a lack of vision going across Hydro Road and up through. Yeah. So yeah, just have a look all around. Maybe work with Liz, or just Liz, you're well aware of it, and see what we can do in the future.
It's on the crow's nest, so it's I think it's probably a police matter. This has happened the last 2 regattas, and they're well aware of it. It's a bit of a tricky one actually, but it's not on council land and it's outside of the traffic management plans that we put out as well. So yeah, I think it's one of those things. It's yellow line, so they just need to be ticketed and that'll sort them out.
There's a feeling that people are not happy to pay a $5 parking fee in the car parks that the council's providing, just going past the main entrance, and I think that's probably part of the issue.
Yeah.
It's always been.
No, thanks for that. We'll follow that through and see the best way to manage that that issue. Clearly, we may need to work with the event organisers in regard to the consequences of the event, i.e. off-site car parking and monitoring and enforcement associated with that. So I'll follow that through. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Wayne. Right, so we have a recommendation there to receive Wayne's report. Do I have somebody second that? Claire and Lou, all those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. That brings us to our morning tea break. How about we On to our next item, which is the final draft of the Lake Tikutu concept plan, and we have Anna and Tafiq. Welcome.
Morning, everyone. So this report basically contains all the changes which was previously discussed and endorsed by council in last year November SPNP meeting. So we are seeking, we are here seeking the final adoption for Lake Tikutu concept plan. I also want to use this opportunity to thank our EV partner Nati Hua and Nati Koroki Kahukura for their involvement throughout their project, their support and the partnership approach we have been going through this project. We want to take this report as read, but happy to answer any questions you guys might have.
Thank you, Tafiq. We've been through this that many times and it's been so well received. I don't know that we need to pull it apart anymore, but in case there are any final questions or comments? No? Okay, so appearing there on page 176, we have the 3 recommendations to receive, adopt and endorse. Do I have anybody happy to move that for me? Mike, and seconded Elwyn. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Many thanks. That was quick. I've caught up. I know, we've caught up. Yeah, okay. Do you have interest? Okay. So the next item is the dual naming of parks, a new signage suite. And I believe Debbie's going to introduce Brad and the item to us. Morning, Brad.
Morning, everybody. So, yeah, just to provide a little summary to begin with, basically this proposal just seeks to modernise the signage that we currently have in our parks and reserves. I think we can all agree that this is a welcome initiative, and I think Brad has some photos just to show you as part of his presentation that he's going to be bringing to you. In terms of the bilingual aspect, this is a trend that we are seeing across the country and recognises the status of Te Reo as an official language of New Zealand. So just happy to hand over to Brad now.
Morena tātou, nā mihi o te tahau Pākehā. I hope everyone enjoyed their Christmas break and New Year. I'll briefly speak to this report and then happy to answer any questions you might have at the end. So back in 2017, which is stretching back a while now, Council rebranded and the park suite didn't really move with the times. We're still carrying some of our old branding throughout all of our parks. And we, in 2019, Community Services, we drafted a basic suite of signage, and now we're in the process of confirming the signage content. As per our existing signage, it has limited wayfinding information on it, and is often ad hoc and very cluttered. So the wayfinding that I'm speaking about today and the identification is different to interpretive signage. We'll be working with mana whenua and other stakeholders separately on that aspect of signage, but this is just primarily for wayfinding and identification. So these are some of the photos that I just quickly whipped out of our asset system last week. As you can see, it's all different kinds of branding and often quite cluttered. And these are some of our, there are other worse sites that can be 4, 5, 6 different signs all within only a few meters of each other. So we're really trying to make it less confusing for people and make it a bit more presentable.
Include the one that says Dad, drive carefully, you need to get home tonight. By the time you finish reading it, you could have crashed, but that's the one that's out on Carperini Road. There, slow down, you need to get home tonight.
Yeah, so that's a little bit different to our signage. We're speaking at the moment just specifically for parks and open spaces. So that I imagine will be Roden or New Zealand Transport Association, I would think. So a bit of a priority of where we'll be going with when we do start implementing these. We do have funding in our current LTP for the Cambridge Town Belt, and also more recently sports parks as well. Often a lot of people go to sports parks and they don't know where to find fields, I don't know where to find toilets and things like that. So we're just trying to make those a bit more easier to navigate. And then also we'll then roll out as we do any renewals, obviously there'll be our new signage as well, and any new development, such as Whare Marama in Cambridge at the moment, it's a new park, but I'll start putting some assets into there and they'll get the new branding.
Yeah. May I interrupt you and just ask a question? Recognising the scope of parks and reserves and your signage, where do our town entrance signs come into the picture? Do they come under the same reserve signs policy, or are they separate? I just feel that, you know, we've kind of ignored our town entrance signs for a little while, and we're starting to not have the same kind of good presentation.
Yeah,
do they
right.
come under this policy?
So that's outside of what I'm paying for this remit. I'm not sure whether it would get picked up and whether it's a special project or whether it would be included as part of the branding of each town.
So I could just probably interrupt Brad there. So they're not part of the Parks and Reserves suite of signs, but Charlotte has been working on some entrance signs to the, so I'll let her give you an update on that.
Kia ora koutou. Yeah, we're just working with the community boards at the moment on the entryway signage in partnership with them because it is very community facing. So as Brad said, that's out of scope of this project, but we're just in the process of getting that along across the line with Cambridge to start, and then we'll work with the other towns.
Okay. Cool. So what we're proposing, excuse me, as part of this design process, we have an opportunity to meet one of our community outcomes of promoting our culture and heritage of the district. So we're looking to include a Māori name above the English name for each park or reserve. So where there's currently just the English name, I'll probably often today use the example of Albert Park just in the road here. It's got an English name with no Māori name at the moment, but we're looking to look at mana whenua to establish either what was the history of that land or a contemporary name to reflect the activities and intents of the parks. So that's an opportunity we have here, as well as to also to work alongside Ngāi Tōpu and our other partners to bring in te reo text, so our signs become bilingual to reflect that language is one of the New Zealand's languages. Flick through. So this is a bit of a draft of what we've got. Hopefully you can sort of see these as I go through them. This is what we've got as a draft at the moment. So you'll see there, consistent with our new branding, it will have the Māori name above the English name. Where there is only a Māori name, there will only be a Māori name. We won't be adding English names to that park. So I used Whare Marama as an example before. That will just be Whare Marama. That won't have an English translation as a name.
Brett, I'm just wondering with your Albert Park example, if it's called out, if we're going to have Albert Park as English name, but then we're going to have a different name as the Māori name, isn't that confusing? Like, wouldn't it be better just to rename the park with the Māori name instead of like giving two completely different names?
I think
different meanings.
Yeah, thanks. I do understand where you're coming from there, Councillor. I think as a first step for our community, like if we went straight to a Māori name, people would then get a little bit more confused as they know Albert Park. So if you think of the sporting community, they know that they play at Albert Park. So I think as we move in this direction, it'll be good to have the Māori name alongside the English name so that they still have that connection. And then as they become more familiar with the Māori name, potentially sometime in the future that may just become the Māori name. I'm thinking of examples like Oraki Mount Cook. At the moment, that's got the dual name, but then you think of Taranaki and Mount Taranaki in New Plymouth there, that's just now Taranaki. You don't really hear Mount Egmont much these days. So I think that's all the transition that we might be looking at. And then different signage will have different elements of messaging on it. After these identification ones, we're sort of thinking we'll go with the sort of home of XYZ community groups that are based at the parks, just for easy identification as people drive past. The one on the left there is the wayfinding map, which I'll enlarge in a minute. So it will really show the path networks and the field networks through our parks that we have. And with some messaging of what you can and can't do down the side, we'll often have a bit of a share with care message there, but they can also be removed and specific messaging, like some of our waterways might have some specific water messaging in that panel there. So it's quite interchangeable depending on which park we're in. That's sort of like the overall draft suite, the different kinds of signs that we might be able to put on the parks. With the dog exercise areas, the ones on the far, the bollard on the right hand side, you can see there next to the gentleman there. That would be identifying as you walk through a park where the dog exercise areas start and finish. And we're looking at also potentially having a path treatment that will be like painted onto the path, so that it's quite clear for people that they're entering into a dog exercise area and then out of it again. So where to next? I'm looking to go and touch base again with Ngāi Tōpū in February, to look to identify a lead research or project lead who will work alongside the individual researchers from mana whenua. Be quite good to have that person of point of contact for us who is right in the detail with them. Once we've got everyone engaged, and the names start coming back to us through the gifting process, we'll then need to take them back through to council for approval as per the draft naming policy at the moment. And then there'll be Reserve Act gazetting requirements as part of that as well. And then we'll be looking to obviously manufacture and install the signs. When the naming policy is adopted in its final state, we'll need to come back to this group just to update my recommendation D in the report today, just to reflect that obviously the naming policy is being confirmed, and that's the policy that we'll be referring to moving forward.
It all looks very good. Might you also be putting a sign there that explains to our non-Māori community why it's called that, so that you would have that as there as well, so that we don't, we don't strike some of the comments that are being made by those who don't appreciate New Zealand history.
Yep. No, thank you, Councillor. That's 100% our plan. Initially, it will be just we've got funding to do the wayfinding and identification. As we start updating those signage into parks, we'll have that online initially. So we'll be able to point people to that commentary, and we'll do a bit of work with the communication teams. But then we'll also look to, as I said earlier, do some interpretive signage, working closely with mana whenua, all other stakeholders in time to reflect those names. Yeah.
You've got it, you know, don't you, that a good 40% of the population of Waipa doesn't have those. Send them off to some website somewhere. Don't have it.
Mm.
So you're intending to follow up the naming with an interpretive sign.
That's correct.
And is that very far down the track?
That'll be as funding becomes available.
No.
That'll be as funding becomes available for the interpretive signs, and we'll be working with the relevant stakeholders.
Yeah, hi Brad. Just quietly, I was just thinking of Anzac Green, which is quite unique in a way, because that represents the World War I contribution for this town. And I would request more than anything that if there is another name going to be given to that, it should be with discussion from the RSA or people of such sort, because we don't want to demean the fact that that was a memorial specifically open for one thing and one thing only, a memory to World War I. And the people that served in that. And I think that, as I say, that's part of our history. You're talking about the history of New Zealand. This is part of our history as well. So I do think that's quite an important issue to consider when you do these sort of things.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. There will be dialogue with all affected parties, because there'll be sports clubs and things as well that will, they're only known as one name at the moment, but yeah, with all the stakeholders, we will be looking to partner with them and talk through these. Yeah.
Clear. At Pirongia, there's 2 reserves that were gifted by iwi, and neither of them have any names, actually. Like that was highlighted last year with the community barbecues. One of them was held at Rangimarie Reserve, but there's no sign to say where Rangimarie Reserve is actually. Yeah, so I'm really hoping that and I know that iwi had said to me that it'd be great if there was an acknowledgement that they had gifted that reserve to the district, or as part of signage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that'll be part of that interpretive panel suite that we do. Yeah.
A question with you saying about existing Maori Park name, then there's be no English interpretation. Why? Why, for consistency, can't we, if possible, if maybe there's no name, but why can't we reverse it?
It's a very, very good question, Councillor. I'm not entirely sure how to answer that myself here. Yeah, I mean,
I guess the issue is not just about equity, it's about reflecting the history of that place. So if the place is a specific significance to mana whenua, but doesn't necessarily have a significance to Pākehā, so there's no name, you wouldn't manufacture a name just for the sake of equity, if you get what I'm saying. So it should be reflective of the history of that place.
Well, no, that's all I want to know. Someone asked
Yeah.
why is that there?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's good. That's the end of the presentation I had there. So if there are any further feedback or questions that you might have, I'm happy to try and answer them.
Does anybody have any other questions or comments to make for Brad? Mariata.
Tēnā tātou. Kia ora, Brad, thanks so much. I just really wanted to acknowledge the work that's gone into creating, this document so far. The inclusion of mana whenua, is, and it is a long time coming, that we're moving towards this, and as we see our nation grow more, knowledge with regard to our history as a country, I think this is a really positive move towards, where we're heading. I did hear you, Hazel, around, your interpretation, well, not the interpretation, but the historical, I suppose, narrative, which goes around each of these parts' names that are given. And, I also acknowledge that, and I think it's really important that you also, equally prioritize that as well. It might be okay for ones like me or younger generations to have a scan, a barcode where I can scan, and then it takes me automatically to that historical narrative. But it is a really, really important part of this educative process that we're trying to achieve through this initiative. So I just want to acknowledge the team. Thank you for that. And with regard to the naming and not providing an English translation, I think, the explanations around the histories that will be given as part of this process, you'll start to begin to understand perhaps why an English translation might not be given. Where I come from and where I've grown up in Pukeatua, to, provide an English name would be the Hill of the Gods, but actually, and that's a literal translation, but actually the whakapapa and history behind the naming of that particular peak has a whole narrative and story around it, which is what we're talking about in terms of a Māori worldview and a non-Māori worldview. And so this is all a journey for us, and I do want to acknowledge the work that's done there. So tēnā tātou.
Thank you, Mariata.
Liz. Yeah, just want to support those comments. I think very well spoken, very well said. Look, I'm really supportive of this. I think it is a long time coming, and I just want to move the recommendation as it is in the paper. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Liz. Any further discussion, or have I got somebody to second that for me? I'm happy to second from the chair. So all those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you so much, Brad, and send your thanks to the team. A lot of great work. Moving on to our next item then, which is the proposed fees and charges for 2021 to 2022. For that we have Kirsty. Welcome back, Kirsty.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, kia ora koutou. You'll recall that the executive team some time ago provided direction that there would be a comprehensive review of user fees and charges undertaken alongside each long-term plan, and that we have workshopped with elected members as we've developed the 21-31 long-term plan user fees and charges. I believe we've had 3 separate workshops. So I'm going to, for all intents and purposes, take the report as read, but just provide a very brief overview. So in terms of the, I guess the flavour for reviewing the fees and charges for 21-22, obviously we've been impacted by COVID, and so front of mind for staff in undertaking the review has been the consideration as to the impact of COVID on our communities, and particularly that issue of affordability. We've also had expert advice from Infometrics telling us that we are yet to see the worst of the impacts of COVID-19, and that years 1 to 3 of the LTP, we can expect to see a decline in non-rates revenue. So although initially they were forecasting that that impact would be felt almost immediately, what we're seeing in practice is actually, in terms of building consents, resource consents, as you heard from Wayne earlier, our numbers are looking quite promising. However, we have adopted a cautious approach. We've also always turning our minds to how can we do things better, and you may recall that currently we have 2 schedules relating to user fees and charges, those that are able to be resolved by council without having to go through a public consultation process, and those that are, for reasons of legislation, bylaw provisions, required to go through a public consultation process. We wanted to ensure that we operate efficiently and effectively for our communities. So we've actually proposing a streamlined approach where we have 1 schedule incorporating all fees and charges. So what we're asking you today is to 1, consider passing a resolution for those fees that are not required to go through a public consultation process. So there is no legislative requirement. They are deemed to be minor changes, no significant increases or decreases in pricing. The second part relates to those fees and charges that 1, are required by legislation to go through a public consultation process, and or as staff we're recommending that we do, because something might be of high public interest or the quantum is deemed to be quite significant. And then the third attachment that you have, third appendices, is the statement of proposal. So that is what we would be seeking to have you approve today. That public engagement would be undertaken alongside the long-term plan. The submissions, hearings and deliberations would be taken alongside. But the adoption we're proposing would actually happen ahead of the long-term plan, because there are implications in terms of levying fees, particularly in relation to dog control. So I'm going to hand over quickly to Graham, who will be leading the next phase of the project, and then we're happy to respond to any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Kirsty, but you've almost said my bit. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yes, the fees and charges that we are seeking approval for consultation, we are planning on consulting those alongside the LTP, which is 26th of March to 27th of April, dates we're proposing for that. And basically running the submissions and deliberation process alongside the LTP. So we'll probably just deal with the fees and charges, then move into the LTP on the 11th of May and deliberations on the 13th. then we sort of separate them so that we can deal with adopting those fees by council on the 25th of May, which gives staff time then to get everything ready for bringing them into effect on the 1st of July. This adoption day for the LTP is set for the 30th of June, so that'll be pushing it for the fees. So that's the timetable we're looking at for fees and charges for next financial year.
Great, thank you for that. Did we have any questions for either investor? Marcus?
I think it's really good. I support the new library fees that are in there. I'm just wondering, so it's not going to cost 50 cents to take an adult book out, but it's now going to cost $1.50 to take an adult book out up to 2 years. Is there any stats on like the age of the books that people are taking out? Like, do people mainly take out books that are less than 2 years old, or are they taking out older books? Or
so I believe that they can't get those stats out of the system. It's just off the top of my head from my understanding, but they have benchmarks against other libraries who do have a similar fee structure. So there has been quite a lot of work and research that's gone into that.
Through the chair, if I can just add to what Debbie said, that has also been a strong driver through this review, is ensuring consistency with other local authorities in terms of user fees and charges, particularly in that library space, but also in terms of the regulatory areas, trying to ensure consistency.
Right. Claire and then Lou.
Thanks, Graham. I've got a question on page 270 of our agenda, which is page 3 of the proposed fees and charges document. It's the new building control fee, checking building consents for compliance with the Resource Management Act. So could you just give me an idea of why that's important to introduce now, given that the RMA is actually signalled for major change, in the next couple of years? Yeah.
I can't respond to the query about the initial fee, but I do know that the work on the RMA is projected to take quite a long time before we see any impact. So I would expect that we would still be needing to update our own fees in the meantime.
Yeah, so I guess, we haven't charged before for checking with compliance for the RMA. We usually check with, like the district plan. So it'd be good to know why it's important to check for compliance with the RMA.
I can follow up with Tony. My understanding is that there is increased complexity. It's ensuring, we've got a growing district, increased complexity in terms of the issues that we're seeing. The charges that have been introduced are to try and reflect actual and reasonable costs incurred by the council. But certainly, Councillor St Pierre, I can follow up, although that won't be obviously here to inform decision making today, but I can come back to you as to why we haven't previously charged and what the driver is now.
Yeah, thanks. I've got a couple of other things. Yeah. The Curbside recycling service, that's on page 274 or page 7 of the document. So we have a new administration fee of $31.50 that's going to be charged for people that want to get curbside recycling where this recycling rate isn't levied. So my understanding is that then they're not paying in their rates for the recycling, which I understand is over $100 a year. So why would people who aren't rated for it only be charged $31.50 for it? I think they're getting a bargain. I mean, why aren't they paid an administration fee as well as...
So Dawn's here and I think she can talk to that query.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's it.
Should that be clarified in this schedule, or is that getting a bit off the point? Yeah.
I think in the document itself, the fees and charges document that is included.
Oh,
the current one is.
Yeah.
So this will just be an additional.
Oh, okay, right.
That is correct. Yeah. Through the chair, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
For example, my understanding is it might, when I asked the question, well, who does this apply to? Childcare centres was one of the examples that was provided to me.
Oh, okay, right. Okay, thank you. And then the next page, page 8 or 275, under museum, just the last word in that paragraph, I think it should be changed to how the image is delivered rather than delivery. So sort of type it, and that occurs also in the consultation document as well. Yeah, and then with the stock underpass new charges, so this is on page 35 or page 338. I think it should be stated that the inspection needs to be carried out every 2 years, because like we're consulting on a new fee and it doesn't state how often it would be charged. Like someone might think, oh, you know, I only need to have it inspected once every 10 years or something. So I think it should be specified. Yeah, and then lastly on page 8 of the statement of proposal for consultation, just a little typo or an expression, I guess. What happens next in that paragraph? It talks about all submissions formally considered at a council hearings commencing on a date, and I think it should be the council hearing, and then in the box underneath it says hearings commence, and I agree that in that context hearing that, yeah, it might be plural, but I would question if it could just be the singular. And then there's on the very last page of our document, there's something about building control fees, but I think that should be removed. Yeah, that doesn't need to be there. But that's all. So my biggest thing was really about the new stock underpass fee that I think people should be aware, like it's quite a hefty fee, yeah, and why it's important. Yeah, thank you.
So we can certainly make those changes. I think, Kieran, that the resolution will just need to be amended to enable staff to make those minor changes relating to wording specific to the museum stock underpasses and process requirements.
No.
Just a question to Graham and you, Kirsty. It's just utility access requirements. Just asking a question on the new fees that you're proposing there for the extension of a work access permit for a WAP and for the transport management plan. What I'm asking is that you're proposing these new charges, and this is on things, for example, for drilling and trenching, which is usually putting facilities that we'll need in our in infrastructure that we need. And it seems to me that you're penalising people who sometimes might, for no reason of their own, let's say COVID, a rain event or something, exceed their time limit. Surely they paid for their work application or their work access permit. And yeah, I'm just wondering, what is the philosophy actually behind this? Why are we doing this now?
Through the chair, we can follow up on that in terms of why we're doing that now. What is the reasoning for that? Again, I can only speak to the, that actual and reasonable costs, but if there's something different to that, we will definitely follow up and come.
Yeah, good morning, Graham. I'm like Claire, I'd like some clarification on the stock underpasses. It's all very well to put down there's a fee. What we need is an indication on how often that inspection's taking place. Now, if you have the older underpasses that have been in for 30 or 40 years, most of them are Hellcore, and we've had roads that have had the Hellcore culverts that have collapsed and needed replacing. So they're going to need inspections on a more frequent basis than the bridge ones now, which are made of concrete, and they have at least a 50 to 80 year life. So what I don't want is the farmers getting clicked every year when it's totally unnecessary in some of those more what I call modern structures. So, but I think what we should do is get some advice from roading or transport in terms of what their recommendation is in light of some of the underpasses we've had in our roading, which are similar to the stock underpasses, just for clarification.
So just through the chair, the wording does reflect that has been provided by the transportation section. You'll recall that there is an agreement in place and that this reflects the central government requirements. So we can have a look at the wording to provide for clarification whether we include a notation which picks up on that 2-yearly inspection. So we'll follow up and liaise with the transportation team.
We might get some submissions from federated farmers coming in to give us some updates on their thoughts on that. Yeah.
Okay, any other comments or questions on that? No, that being the case, I think we have a slight change to the recommendation. Don't look so scared, Kieran. So paragraph A remains unchanged. Paragraph B, slightly changed. So what have you got so far?
The council adopts the fees and charges referred to by Appendix 1 to become effective on 1 July 2021. Got enabling staff to make relevant clarification on stock underpass fees and process requirements.
Should it be subject to clarifications around? Okay. Yeah, it might help if it's, yeah. Museum is the other one. Okay, so we have a couple of wee changes to paragraphs B and C. B will now read that council adopts the fees and charges referred to in Appendix A, schedule of proposed fees and charges for 21-22 for council resolution to become effective on 1 July 2021, subject to staff making relevant clarification to stock underpass inspection timeframes and for museums changing delivery to how it is delivered. That's the first, that's B. And C as the same paragraph, except at the bottom, after the word long-term plan, wording long-term plan, it says subject to correction of minor typographical errors in the document. You're comfortable with that?
We will follow up on that.
Just follow up on that. I'm just quite interested to know why.
I've noted it. Through the chair, I've noted that down for follow-up.
Okay.
And we'll come back to you as soon as we can on these clarifications.
You comfortable with that, Lou? Excellent. Great. So those being the two changes to B and C, do I have anybody who's happy to move? Andrew will move A, B and C. Anybody second? Claire will second. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Great. Thanks very much. Done and dusted. That brings our meeting to a conclusion, and I believe we have a workshop